afternoon. Welcome. My name is Edgar Aponte, and I have the privilege to serve as Vice President of Mobilization at the International Mission Board. Today, we'll have a dialogue about cooperation. Why do we cooperate and how we cooperate as Southern Baptists? I want to ask my guests to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Stephen Rummage, and I serve as the pastor of Bell Shoals Baptist Church in Brandon, Florida. They're in the Tampa area. I also am serving as the outgoing chairman of our executive committee. Will continue serving as a member of that committee. And then right now I'm also the president of our Florida Baptist Convention.
My name is Keith Whitfield, and I teach theology at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, and also the Dean of Graduate Studies and Vice President of Academic Administration. And my family and I, we attend Faith Baptist Church right outside of Wake Forest.
Well, I'm glad that you accepted our invitation to have a dialogue about cooperation. I would like to ask you, why do we cooperate?
Well, I think for us as Southern Baptists, the beginning place for cooperation is the recognition of the fellowship we have together as believers in Jesus Christ, not only within our churches, but among our churches, and then a recognition that as we cooperate together, and as churches band together to do the Great Commission work that God's called us to do, we really can accomplish more together than any of our churches can accomplish by themselves. And so as we cooperate, we're able to send missionaries, we're able to plant churches, we're able to provide for theological education in a way that we'd never be able to do if we were simply working as individual churches. For me, that's why cooperation means so much.
You want to?
Yeah, I would just add to that. It's a great answer. What I would add to is we think about the Great Commission and what the Great Commission is. The Great Commission goes to every individual, every church, and it's to the whole world. So when you think about the task that we're given as individuals and as churches, it's bigger than we can accomplish. So built into the Great Commission itself is a requirement that we would cooperate with one another in order to accomplish it. So the task is bigger than us. That means we've got to do it together.
And so as we think about that, and that goes back to 1845, the reason we came together was to cooperate so that we can, for that sacred effort, so that we can reach the nation with the gospel of Jesus Christ. As we do that, but sometimes the work of cooperation is difficult, so there's challenges in that. So how do we do that in a way that is effective? How do we do that? For example, since 1925, the corporate program has shaped who we are as Southern Baptists. It has been the vehicle that God has used for us Southern Baptists to come together and take the gospel to the nations, to plant churches here. How do we do that? For example, we were discussing before this conversation, Keith and I, and he said, like, we should ask Dr. Rummage about this.
Okay.
Is many pastors, many churches, church members, they don't understand how do we cooperate. Can you explain that to us as a pastor?
Well, and it is a challenge, especially at a church like Bell Shoals where I serve. Many of our people come to our church from a non-Southern Baptist background. Many of them come from a non-Christian background. They're being saved and then become part of our church membership. Many of them are coming from other types of church experiences, other traditions. And so to talk to them about what it means to cooperate with Southern Baptist churches is a big part of what we need to do as people are coming into our fellowship, and then something that we have to remind our people of throughout the life of our fellowship. So just a few things that we do. One thing that we do for all of our new members, we have a class that we require them to take that teaches them many things about our church, including how significant cooperating is. I do a new members luncheon about 4 times a year, and I preach it right after. I say I preach. I am sort of preaching. It's a luncheon, and then after we finish eating, I do a little message, and I say it's not a sermon, but I have 4 points, and they all start with the same letter, so it's sort of like a sermon. And I tell them 4 things about our church, and those 4 things, and this isn't original to me, but I tell them that we are believers in Jesus Christ. We're belongers. We have a fellowship together. We're becomers. We're growing in our relationship with Christ. But then also, we are Baptists, and specifically, we are Southern Baptists. And so at the outset of their coming into our fellowship and even learning about our fellowship, I want our members to understand what it means to be Baptist, and specifically what it means to be Southern Baptist. And I talk about how we join together cooperatively with other Southern Baptist churches across our country, and that we do it for the purpose of missions, evangelism, church planting, equipping and training pastors and missionaries through our seminaries. We talk about it there, and then we reiterate it throughout the life of our church.
So before we jump that, so as you do that as a pastor, you're shepherding them, you're teaching them, you're helping them to understand.
Right.
Have you received any pushback from people who come from different backgrounds?
I wouldn't say that I receive any pushback, but it does take some time for people to get clarified in their thinking that we are autonomous, really independent churches, and that we simply join together cooperatively. That the thing that ties us together is no contract, no hierarchy, nothing other than a decision for us as Baptists to say we want to join together and work cooperatively, because we realize that by doing that, we can reach our world for Jesus Christ.
Praise God. Keith?
Last night I was at the IMB dinner, and I sat there and I looked around the room and I saw there's a pastor over there that I know, and there's a seminary student there that I know, and I sat by a long-term IMB missionary, and my daughter is sitting there, and here I am sitting at the table as a theology professor, and I just had this recognition that everybody in this room is in my classroom. That's how we cooperate, right? Is that we're in our work together. I got a letter at the table from a missionary who's going to Europe to be on a church planting team, and she communicated in that letter that the person who's going to read, she didn't know who's going to read that letter, that's going to be there with her, because I'm cooperating with her. That's the way we cooperate. We're in each other's work, because we have gathered together and have decided to join together to do this, to reach the world for the sake of Christ together.
Amen. Welcome. We have Kevin Smith, who just joined us, who's the state executive for Maryland, Delaware. And welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Good to be here.
Yes. We were talking about Cooperation Southern Baptist, why do we do that and how we do that. You lead a state convention, and you served before that as a pastor in Kentucky. You taught at a seminary in Kentucky. As a person who's the CEO of a state, who's leading the state, how do you shepherd your churches? How do you encourage pastors who are new to the Southern Baptist Convention, some who struggle to understand the way we cooperate? How do you do that?
Yes. Well, and I agree with what these brothers have shared. But one thing that's different in Maryland, Delaware from Florida or North Carolina is just the number of Southern Baptist churches. So cooperation is one thing where there's a good amount of Southern Baptist cultural DNA. Cooperation is another thing when you're in an area where you feel out of the traditional Bible Belt, where you clearly feel more like a First Peter type people. So there's the missiological, methodological, theological commitments, but there's also just a relational. When I was in the Kentucky Baptist Convention, 2,400 churches, 25% of the population of Kentucky were like Kentucky Baptists. So that's different when you get into Maryland, Delaware, and so a church in this county really appreciates being able to fellowship with a church in this county. And so the cooperation goes certainly with theological and methodological, but also just relationships. And I encourage pastors, I don't have to encourage pastors long, because they themselves realize the need for fellowship with others in those types of settings. Now, one thing that's interesting, since I've been at the Baptist Convention in Maryland, Delaware, almost monthly, I am meeting with independent Baptist pastors and preaching at independent Baptist churches, because they realize the challenge of being out there by yourself trying to do some of the things that they do. And so, for example, if they're interested in overseas, we talk about the missionary investment that they're making. And I said, well, let me show you kind of what that same kind of investment does in the cooperative program. And I lay out the things of our mission boards and seminary and state convention life and all that. And they see that the same missionary investment is just, expanded in the breadth of what they are able to do with that ministry investment. Just it multiplies. And so it's a very, outside of the South, it is very, just as these brothers mentioned, plus that additional just relational element of being in much smaller spaces with large secular influences in the culture.
Even in your own experience, when you were president of the Kentucky Baptist and pastor of High View, for example, there's any way that you shepherd the congregation to understand the importance of cooperation? Any practical way that you can share with us?
Yes. No, number one, it was part of our new members process. We talked about who we are theologically and denominationally. And then also, we had a strong missions DNA in our church, and just helping people understand the capacity that we have to reach the nations based upon our cooperative work together. And then also, I teach history. And so I remind people that, Baptists have felt this way in America since 1814. Baptists have felt like we need to cooperate together to do global missions even before there was a Southern Baptist Convention. Baptists have always felt like we can get the greatest effectiveness and efficiency when we do these things together. So I share that extra historical component, but I think it's vital to have that as part of your new members process, or however you train and develop members.
And I would say, not only Baptist, I would say Paul, who was a Baptist, felt that way. I mean, when we read 2 Corinthians 8, that he's addressing the Corinthian church, I said, like the Macedonians, he put that as an example. He said they were struggling, yet they gave to help and serve the saints in Jerusalem. So he's encouraging them. So that idea of cooperation, churches coming together to serve the larger church and to those who have not heard the gospel.
Right. One of the things I love that Kevin said is the idea of cooperation coming out of our relationships. Yeah, I think sometimes it's easy for us to start thinking that cooperation is simply a matter of us pooling our money together. And certainly that's an important component. I wouldn't diminish that. But I had a friend who said something to me that I really liked. He said, our mission together flows from our fellowship together. And because we have a relationship with one another as churches, and because there's a cooperative spirit to say, okay, we want to reach the world with the gospel. We know we can't do it alone. We also know that we need one another just to be who God has called us to be as His church and His churches, that we want to connect with one another. And so I think that's really essential, especially as you think about church connecting to church. I know what you're talking about is like, how do you get the people in the church to understand cooperation? But church to church, that cooperative spirit, I think is really important.
And one of the ways to get them to see it is to help them experience it.
Right.
And one of the ways to help them experience it is to experience the relationship of churches doing work together and seeing what they can accomplish by themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think the future of cooperation is us figuring out how to leverage the relationships better. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the challenges for us currently as a convention is it doesn't feel too relational. It feels a whole lot more mechanized.
Right.
And there's a sense in which that's the case, and we need to have a vision for that. We need to have a vision that we are doing something more than we can do by ourselves when we do it together, and we see that we're participating in one another's work. But if we just have a vision, we don't experience it relationally, that sort of loses its flavor a little bit.
Right.
Because one of the challenges of cooperation is this. While we're autonomous local churches, for us to cooperate, it means that we defer our preferences to work with other people.
Right.
And we only do that when we have relationships with them and we see that the vision and what we can accomplish together is worth deferring our preferences for.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we do that in practical way? Like I was earlier today I met with 300 DONs, and we're talking about and how it was with the IMB. I said, like, we want you to be ambassador, an extension, kind of pro bono ambassador of IMB. You are the forefront of ministry. You bringing pastors together. You mobilizing them. So, but how we do that? Because to your point, most church members don't have an idea how we cooperate and why we cooperate. Mm-hmm. But it's pastors who are shepherding, leading them, who have to be engaged mainly because that's not a concern of most members in the pews. So how do we foster that relational aspect? Any one of you?
Well, one thing is honoring the gifts of others and not being not being concerned that my members or whoever, they think I'm this fountain of whatever, but we can affirm other gifts. So in the congregation, for example, Highview, I would always make sure I reference when I was getting something from the ERLC, because I would say, look, of course we understand these things about life at the most basic level, but there's medical technology and there's things that are just highly complex, and I can't be the pastor. I can't pastor here and study these highly complex issues, and so we get to go over and benefit from the ERLC. I read some of this stuff from legal opinions and things that they have processed. I'm not an attorney, and there are very few attorneys in our church, so acknowledging and benefiting and letting our people know when we get those other resources, Skyping in IMB, and that's part of the relational thing as well, Skyping in IMB missionaries. With the technology, our missionaries don't have to seem so far away, but also, so churches constantly, particularly pastors, making sure that our members understand and benefit from those resources. We are a convention of churches, not a convention of pastors, and so we need to make sure that members of our churches understand the benefits.
I think too, you mentioned Skyping in missionaries and creating points of contact like that. I also find that when our people are involved in doing missions together, whether that's on the foreign field or whether that's something in North America, that gives them the opportunity many times to work with other churches in doing that, but then certainly to connect with North American Mission Board church planners, IMB personnel on the field, and suddenly this becomes real to them.
As we close, I would like to ask you a question. So how will you encourage younger generation? So one of the challenges that I see is like we have kind of a cavalier attitude toward the past. And this spirit that want to question everything. I mean, instead of like, let's make it better, sometimes like, get rid of that. I don't think that's wise. So how can we encourage and help younger pastors to engage and understand the importance of cooperation, and even when we don't agree with everything, how important it is, and to see the legacy, the stewardship that we have to previous generation, how we do that? Any quick thought? I mean, you have a student in front of you every semester, every week.
I think our younger pastors recognize the need for relationships. They want relationships. They want people ahead of them. They want people around them that can help them in ministry, and so they don't feel alone. That's an easy felt need for our younger pastors. I think one of the things they want to know is that it's worth the investment. So I think one of the ways to help them is to help them see that it's worth the investment. And one of the ways to help them see it's worth the investment is that everything they do, they don't find a roadblock. And somebody opens the door for them to be able to have a voice and to contribute. And then that they see other leaders around them and see what they're doing and how they are impacting for the kingdom and the ethics that they're doing it with, and it inspires them. So I think our younger guys need that sort of exemplar around them. And they need somebody to open the door for them, and they need to know it's worth it. They already know the felt need. They know they don't want to be by themselves. And if they've been by themselves for just a couple of weeks in ministry, they know they don't want to be by themselves much longer. But we've got to help them to see the opportunity and it's worth the investment.
Any final thought?
Biblically, younger brothers and older brothers must value the Moses, Joshua type relationships and the Paul, Timothy, Titus type relationships. Methodologically, state conventions have to be very intentional about getting younger Baptists in their state involved at committee and board type levels within the state, because usually when somebody serves at a national level, they've served in their state convention, and those committee on nomination or committee on committee folks recommend them at the national level. So state execs or state people have to be very intentional about getting younger people involved.
The thing that kills cooperation is when leaders hold on to power and influence. The thing that gives cooperation life is when leaders free up other people to be able to use their gifts and free up other people to use their influence into the work. And so that's the kind of leaders we need. It's the kind of leaders we need to pray for. It's the kind of leaders we need to be.
Amen. I would also say if we have a common mission, and that is the Great Commission,
Yes.
and then if we have a fellowship together as brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ, then what's going to flow out of that is cooperation together in that mission.
Yeah. And on behalf of the International Mission Board, I want to say thank you. As a pastor, as a leader, thank you for your generosity and your support, your leadership in Florida and across the convention. I want to say thank you as a teacher, as an administrator who is teaching and helping students understand the importance of obeying the Great Commission. And as a state executive, I want to say thank you for the partnership that we have with you. Today we'll be celebrating the sending of 79 new missionaries. And those are your missionaries. You are the one that are making that possible. And we are thankful to the Lord for the partnership that we have with you. Thank you. And thank you for you all. Thank you.